There is a kind of person who watches before they speak, who listens more than they answer, who will sit across from you at a table, smile at the right moments, laugh when the moment calls for it, and still, quietly, privately, hold something back. Not because they are cold, not because they are calculating, but because somewhere along the way, something taught them that giving your trust away is not a gift, it is a risk. And risks, for them, stopped feeling worth it. You probably know someone like this. Or maybe, and this is the part that tends to surprise people, you are someone like this. Today we are going to talk about the psychology behind people who do not trust easily. Not the surface version of that story, the one that gets reduced to phrases like trust issues or emotional walls, but the deeper version, the one that starts much earlier than most people realize, unfolds much more quietly than anyone notices, and carries a weight that is almost never fully understood by the people watching from the outside. Because here's the truth about people who struggle to trust. They are not broken. They are not difficult. They are not choosing to make relationships harder than they need to be. They are doing something that, at some point in their life, made complete and total sense. They learned, from experience, that certain people, maybe specific people, maybe a pattern of people, could not be counted on. And so they adapted. The way every human being adapts, the way we are designed to adapt. The problem is that adaptations built for one environment do not always translate cleanly to the next one. Let us start at the beginning. Trust is not a choice, not in the way we like to think it is. We talk about trust as if it is a decision we make consciously. I have decided to trust this person. But psychologists who study attachment and early development will tell you something different. Trust, at its most foundational level, is a conclusion. It is the conclusion a very young nervous system reaches after collecting enough evidence about whether the world and the people in it can be relied upon. That process starts earlier than most of us can remember. Long before language, long before the ability to reflect on what is happening. A child does not decide to trust their caregiver. They simply notice, again and again, whether when they reach out, when they cry, when they need something, when they are frightened, something reaches back, whether the world responds. When it does, consistently, the nervous system begins to relax, not all at once, but gradually, over hundreds of small interactions, something settles. The world is safe enough. People are reliable enough. I can let my guard down. When it does not, when the response is unpredictable, or frightening, or simply absent, something else happens. The nervous system learns a different lesson, a more cautious one that says, do not assume, do not relax, stay alert, because the moment you stop watching is the moment something goes wrong. This is not a moral failing. It is not weakness. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you, based on the information available to it. And here's what makes this so important to understand. Those early conclusions do not stay confined to childhood. They travel. They become the lens through which a person reads new situations, new relationships, new people. They become the background assumption that runs quietly underneath every interaction. Not always consciously, not always loudly, but there, always there. Psychologists call this an internal working model, a kind of internal blueprint built from early experience that shapes how we expect relationships to function. Whether we expect to be met or disappointed, whether we expect people to stay or leave, whether we expect that opening ourselves up will lead somewhere good or somewhere we have already been and never want to go back to. For people who do not trust easily, that internal working model was built in an environment that gave them very good reasons to be careful. Sometimes those reasons are obvious. A parent who was unpredictable, warm one day, withdrawn or frightening the next. A household where stability was never guaranteed. A childhood where the people who were supposed to protect you became the source of the thing you needed protecting from. But sometimes the reasons are less dramatic. Sometimes they are quieter. A parent who was loving but emotionally unavailable, physically present but never quite reachable. A friendship that ended in a betrayal so specific, so personal, that it rewrote something fundamental about how safe it felt to be known. A relationship that taught you slowly that the version of you people seemed to love was a version you had to perform, and that the real version, the unedited one, was too much, or not enough, or simply not what anyone actually signed up for.
The brain is very good at pattern recognition. It is, in fact, one of the things it does best. And when a pattern repeats, when experience after experience confirms the same conclusion, the brain stops treating it as new information. It starts treating it as fact. People cannot be trusted. Or more precisely, it is not safe to trust. It is not safe to need. It is not safe to let someone close enough to see the parts of you that you cannot easily explain or defend. And so the armor goes on. Not all at once, gradually, in layers. So slowly sometimes that the person wearing it does not even notice it has happened. They just know that something shifted, that somewhere along the way, the ease they might have once felt, the openness, the willingness to reach toward people without calculating the risk first, became something else, something more careful, more contained, more alone. There is a specific kind of loneliness that belongs to people who do not trust easily. It is not the loneliness of having no one around. Often they are surrounded by people. They can be charming, warm, deeply perceptive about the needs of others. They know how to be in a room. They know how to make people feel seen and valued and comfortable. What they do not always know how to do is let someone do that for them. Because letting someone in, really in, past the version of yourself that is presentable and manageable, requires something that every previous experience has told them is dangerous. It requires believing, without proof, that this time will be different, that this person is different, that the risk this time is worth taking. And for a nervous system trained on evidence, that kind of belief does not come easily. It feels, quite literally, like stepping into the air and hoping something catches you. Most people who struggle with trust will tell you that they want to let people in. They are not holding back because they enjoy the distance. They are holding back because every time they have tried to close it, something happened. And the brain, meticulous, loyal, exhaustingly protective, filed it away, added it to the record, adjusted the calculation. And this is where the psychology becomes something most people never talk about. Because it is not just about the past, it's about what the past does to the present. Specifically, to the way the brain processes new relationships, new people, new moments of potential closeness. When someone who does not trust easily enters a new relationship, romantic, professional, even a new friendship, their nervous system does not enter it cleanly. It enters it carrying all the previous evidence, all the previous conclusions, all the times the calculation came out wrong. And so they watch. They look for the signs they have learned to look for, the small inconsistencies, the moments where words and actions do not quite line up, the feeling, sometimes rational, sometimes not, that something is being withheld, that there is a version of this person or this situation that has not been shown to them yet. This hypervigilance is exhausting, not just for the people around them, who sometimes experience it as suspicion or distance or an inability to simply be present in a moment, but for the person themselves. Living with a nervous system that is always slightly on guard, always doing background checks that nobody asked for, is a particular kind of tired that does not respond to rest. Because it is not about being tired, it's about being careful. And the thing about being careful is that it is very hard to stop, even when you want to, even when the situation seems to call for it, because the part of the brain doing the calculating is not the part that listens to reason. It is the part that remembers. But here is what almost nobody tells people who struggle with trust, and it's the thing that changes everything when you finally hear it. The armor that kept you safe is also the thing keeping you from what you actually want.
And understanding why that happens, what is actually going on beneath the surface, in the neuroscience, in the attachment patterns, in the very specific way the brain tries to protect a person who has been hurt before. That is where this story goes next. There's a concept in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. It is the brain's ability to change, to form new connections, to revise old conclusions, to update the internal map it has been carrying. And for a long time, scientists believed this ability peaked in childhood and then slowly diminished, that the brain, once shaped, was largely fixed. We now know that is not true. The brain retains the capacity to change throughout a lifetime. It is slower in adulthood than in childhood. It requires more repetition, more intention, more patience. But it is possible. The conclusions that were written in early experience, the ones that said people cannot be relied on, that closeness is dangerous, that trust is a risk not worth taking, those conclusions are not permanent. They are not facts carved into stone. They are patterns. And patterns, given the right conditions, can be rewritten. This is not a promise that healing is easy. It is not a suggestion that the right mindset will undo years of careful, painful learning in a weekend. What it is something more honest than that. An acknowledgement that the story is not finished, that where a person is right now is not where they have to stay. But before we talk about how that changes, we need to talk about something that almost never gets discussed when people talk about trust, and that is the cost. Not the cost to relationships, which gets talked about plenty, the cost to the person themselves. Because living with a nervous system that cannot fully relax in the presence of other people is expensive, not in ways that show up on the outside. On the outside, people who do not trust easily are often remarkably functional. They are self-sufficient. They have learned to need very little from others because needing things from others has historically not gone well. They are often the person everyone else leans on, perceptive, steady, reliable, because they have spent a lifetime watching people closely enough to understand what they need. But underneath that functionality, something is running constantly, a background process that never fully shuts down, evaluating, monitoring, looking for the thing that will confirm what it already suspects. Psychologists call this the cost of chronic self-protection, the body and mind spending resources on defense that could be spent elsewhere, on creativity, on presence, on the kind of deep, unguarded connection that the person often privately aches for but cannot quite let themselves have. And this is where something important needs to be said directly. People who struggle to trust are not choosing to be this way. They did not wake up one day and decide that relationships would be held at arm's length, that intimacy would always feel slightly dangerous, that the moment someone gets close enough to matter, some part of them would quietly start preparing for the moment they leave. They learned it from people who were supposed to teach them something else, in environments that did not give them the safety they needed to learn it differently. And that matters. Not because it removes responsibility for the choices made in the present, but because it changes the conversation from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. And that shift, small as it might sound, is often the beginning of everything. There's a researcher named Dr. Sue Johnson who has spent decades studying emotional connection and what gets in the way of it. One of the things she talks about is the idea of attachment injuries. Specific moments in a relationship where a person reached out and found nothing there, where the person they needed most was absent or dismissive or actively harmful, and how those moments, if they are never processed, never named, never brought into the open, become the invisible architects of every relationship that follows.
The person who was let down at 7 will spend decades quietly testing whether the people in their life will let them down too. Not consciously, not as a decision, but as a reflex so deep and so automatic that it feels less like a behavior and more like just the way things are. What changes things, the research suggests, is not simply deciding to trust more. It is not willpower, and it is not positive thinking, and it is not telling yourself that this time is different. What changes things is experience, new experience.
Experience that is different enough, consistent enough, and safe enough to begin to update the internal model. This can happen in therapy, particularly attachment-focused or somatic approaches that work with the nervous system directly, not just the thinking mind. It can happen in relationships, where a partner or a friend shows up again and again in the ways the person was never shown up for before. It can happen slowly, almost invisibly, across years of small moments that accumulate into something the nervous system eventually has to acknowledge. Maybe not everyone leaves. Maybe not every closeness ends in loss. Maybe the calculation needs to be updated. It is not fast. It is not linear. There will be moments of opening followed by moments of retreating, and the retreating will not always make sense to the people on the outside. And sometimes it will not even fully make sense to the person doing it. The nervous system does not update on a schedule. It updates on evidence, and evidence takes time. But here is what the research also shows, and this is the part that tends to matter most to people who have spent a long time believing that this is simply who they are. The capacity for trust is never fully gone. It was not destroyed by what happened. It was protected, tucked away, behind the armor, behind the hypervigilance, behind the careful distance that became a habit. It is still there, waiting in the way that all deeply human things wait, not with urgency, but with a quiet, persistent readiness to be called back into the world. If you are someone who recognizes yourself in any of this, someone who has spent years wondering why closeness feels so complicated, why the people you want most are the ones you hold at arm's length, why trust has always felt like a fall rather than a foundation, I want to say something directly. You are not too damaged. You are not too far gone. You are not someone who missed the window. You are someone whose nervous system did exactly what it was supposed to do with the information it was given. And now, slowly, carefully, on your own timeline and nobody else's, you get to give it new information. That is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything. If this video reached something in you, if it named something you have been carrying for a long time without quite having the words for, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it too. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology of how we connect, protect ourselves, and slowly find our way back to each other, there is more here waiting for you. Take care of yourself and take your time.